This is called solving by factoring. So remember, what solving means is to find the value of the variable. And I notice that I've screwed this up, of course. So let's make this a p as well as this, right? It should be all the same variable. And then, of course, this is an m. So sorry about that. Okay. So remember, solving means to find the value of the variable. And the way that we learn to do this is using the zero product property, which says that if two things multiply to equal 0, that one of the things that's multiplying must equal 0. So we can see we have a quadratic expression, and we know how to factor these, right? We know how to factor these, and I notice that they equal 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this from this form to what's called factored form. Okay, and I notice there's no number out in front here, so this is just going to be a p and a p, right? And remember, I need two numbers that multiply to -5 and add to 4. So right away, I think, what are two numbers that multiply to a negative? It's going to be a positive and a negative. And the only two numbers that multiply to 5 are 5 and 1. So if I want one of them to be positive, one of them to be negative, and I want them to add to a positive, I'm going to make the larger number positive and the smaller number negative. Now, remember what the zero product property says. The zero product property says if this times this equals 0, then either this part must equal 0 or this part must equal 0. One of them's got to equal 0, because that way, when, let's say this one equals 0, then I multiply it by whatever this equals, it's going to equal 0. Or maybe this one equals 0, and then when I multiply it by whatever this equals, it still equals 0. So let's go ahead and solve. And I get p equals -5, or p equals 1, right? Like, let's say, imagine p is 1. This is 1 minus 1. This part would become 0. Now, this part would be 6, but 6 times 0 would be 0, so that works. If this was -5, this would be -5 plus 5. That would be 0, and even though this wouldn't be 0, it would be 0 times -6, and that would also be 0. So what we write is we write p equals, this is what you would type in IXL, -5, comma 1. Okay. Let's look at this one. This one's a little different. It doesn't have a third term. So what I'm going to understand here is that I can take out a greatest common factor. What do these have in common? Well, let's just think about it. Like, this is n times n, and this is 6 times n. So what factor do they have in common? They have an n in common. So what I can do is I can just factor out an n, like this, and then n times what is n squared? Well, n times n is n squared, and n times what is 6n? Well, n times 6 is 6n. So this is factored form. Now, if this times this equals 0, either, look, and I could write a second set of parentheses around this n. We don't really do that usually, but I can if it kind of makes it clear to you. But this times this equals 0. So either n equals 0 or n plus 6 equals 0. Now look, this is already solved. So 0 is one possible value for n, and I'm going to solve this. The other possible value for n is -6. So I would write n could equal -6 or 0. Okay, now look, when I talked about the answer here, I plugged back into here or to here to kind of check it. But look, you can also plug all the way into here. Look, if n is -6, that would be -6 times -6, that'd be 36. And then this would be 6 times -6, that'd be -36. That'd be 36 minus 36. Yep, that does equal 0. Or if this was 0, this should be 0 plus 0 equals 0. So that works too. Let's do one more. This one is more like the first one, where I'm going to factor. I need two numbers that multiply to +18 and add to -9. Right away, when I think, oh, I need two numbers that multiply to a positive and add to a negative, I know that's going to be a negative and a negative. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 18 and add to 9. So multiply to 18, that could be 1 and 18, 2 times 9, these don't add to 9. Oh, what about 3 times 6? Those add to 9. Okay, so then either m minus 3 equals 0 or m minus 6 equals 0. And when I add 3 to both sides, this becomes a 3. This becomes a 6. So m could equal either 3 or 6. And that's what you would type into IXL. All right, so it's your turn, and you're going to go, you can use this space down here, you can use the space on the back. You only need to get to 50.